Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome. So good to see you. Welcome to Tech Leaders Hub Fintech, episode number 7. My guest today is Skyler Nesheim from Dwolla. Skyler, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's a pretty great day where I'm at. Yesterday we had an amazing 70-degree day in Iowa. Feels like spring is coming out of the eclipse of winter, and I'm
Yeah.
really excited about that.
Yeah. Wow. My lack of knowledge is really showing here because when I think 70 degrees, I feel like I'm thinking, not livable temperature over here in
Yeah,
Europe.
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, yeah. We're actually quite chilly here in Poland now. We had like -7, and my wife was looking at the plants on the balcony. She was like, "Yep, these are not seeing next week." But anyway, Skylar, so glad that you're joining us here today, and you, dear watchers and listeners, thank you so much for taking the time to be with Tech Leaders Hub today. Or if you're watching the recording, any time from today till the end of infinity, thanks for taking the time to watch our session. And we've got a really good one lined up, all about evangelism and the developer experience and how to build a great one. And Skylar is here to tell us all about that. People will still be joining in for a little while. Let's give them a moment. And there's also usually a little bit of a delay, so let's allow everyone to kind of get started. As you're joining in, watchers and listeners, remember the usual steps. Let us know if everything is fine, if you can see us, and if you can hear us, please leave a comment. It will put us at ease. Meanwhile, Skylar, given what we have to discuss today, who do you hope will be tuning in? Who do you think will benefit the most from listening to our conversation, and to who will benefit the most from your experience here?
Yeah, I think there's probably, I hope there's something that I say that's applicable or valuable to everyone that's listening. But I think probably the folks who might get the most out of this will be tech leaders, those who have APIs that they offer to their client or their user base. Maybe those who are responsible for evangelizing or talking to other engineers and other companies about how their technology stacks work, how they function, how they might utilize them, some of the flexibility and benefits available to them. So, that's I think really the audience that we're shooting for today.
Exactly. And this being Tech Leaders Hub Fintech, we are going to focus a little bit on that side of things. And remember, there's two kind of flavors of Tech Leaders Hub, the main one and Fintech one. Been a while since we had a Fintech session, so I'm really glad that we're touching upon that today. All right, people are still joining in. Again, leave us a comment if you can see us and if you can hear us. Remember, this is getting turned into a podcast later on. We really want everything to be crystal clear when this is in podcast form. Meanwhile, I'm going to follow what is tradition for Tech Leaders Hub. So, Skylar, I wanted to ask you the question that I've already asked like 24 tech leaders at this point, and very happy about it. What is your number one tip for tech leaders?
So I've had in my time, especially in my time at Dwolla, the opportunity to work with a couple really amazing, great leaders. And when I thought about my great tip for tech leaders, I thought about leadership and I thought about those great leaders that I've worked with, and some of the advice that they've given to me. And there's actually not one, but two things that came to mind. So I'm going to cheat a little bit with the question, Kuba. I hope you don't mind.
Very well, I'll allow it.
Yeah. So the first one so the two individuals that come to mind have both been CEOs at Dwolla. The first one is Dwolla's current CEO, Brady Harris. And the second one is Dwolla's founder, Ben Milne. So let's talk about Brady for a minute. From working with Brady, I've learned so much, just a credible amount about building teams and about being a leader and about team building. And when I think about leadership and I think about what I've learned from Brady, the thing that kind of comes top of mind really quickly is about building the right team, right? And ultimately, that one of the conversations we've had many times is it doesn't really matter how good you are as a leader or how hard you work as a leader or how lucky you get as a leader or as a company. At the end of the day, your responsibility is to get the best people working for your teams. And if you don't have the right people on your team, you don't have the right people on your bus, it's going to be really difficult for you to win as a company. And so it's so important to spend much of your time on team building, team growth, finding the right people, new and exciting talent, diverse perspectives, all these things that fall into the responsibility of the leaders in building your team.
Okay,
So that was
that's
the
great.
first one that came to mind. The second one, again, I'm kind of cheating. Second one that came to mind is a conversation that I've had with our founder of Dwolla, Ben Milne, many times. And it stems, so Ben introduced me to this concept of mental models as a way to sort of be a full-rounded leader and make sure that you have lots of different perspectives on the world that you can bring to the table. Mental models that you've used to help solve problems. And you'll find that different mental models work to solve different kinds of problems. One of the mental models I learned from Ben Milne comes from game theory. And there's sort of a couple different concepts in game, lots of different concepts in game theory, and I'm not an expert, but one that's always resonated with me that I've used as a mental model is kind of this concept of zero-sum games and infinite-sum games.
Yeah.
A zero-sum game, right, is a game where there's two players, and at the end of the day, ultimately one player has to win and one player has to lose. So one player gets a +1, one player gets a -1. If you add those things together, the sum is 0. It's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
I think that growing up and through our life, we learn about the types of initiatives and games that are zero-sum games. But ultimately in life, the things that you do a lot of times are more infinite-sum games. Again, team building is kind of an infinite-sum game. Working in particular industries can be an infinite-sum game. Sure, there are often winners and losers, but if we can approach our world through the mindset, the mentality that it's an infinite-sum game, and there's many, many different ways to win and lots of ways for players in the game to build their score, it opens that mental model, that perspective to something kind of different. And so Ben and I have used this phrase many times before, that we want to play infinite-sum games with infinite-sum people.
Oh, wow. Okay, I mean that is very striking. And how would you define an infinite sum person? Is just a mindset? Is that something they do? Is it a set of habits? Tell me more about that.
For me, I think it's a mindset. That they've really bought into this concept of an infinite sum game, and maybe it's more of a nerdy or fun way to talk about having a growth mindset.
Yeah,
and that's something that I've always been thoughtful about and passionate about as a leader, is having a growth mindset where we're not fixed in how things are today. We always believe that there's something more we can learn. There's something further that we can go, somewhere further that we can go. So that's what I think about there.
Okay, yeah. I love that. The growth mindset also came to my mind, but I do think it's related, but not, 100% the same. And what I like is, I think it ties also to the world becoming digital, because when you think about it, it used to be more zero sum, where if I had a tool and I gave you that tool, hammer, let's say, then I lost the hammer and you gained the hammer. But with digital tools, it's like I can have a copy of a software on my machine, you can have a copy, and we both still keep our respective copies. It's all that would be infinite sum, right? Yeah.
And let's talk about, just for a second, and I know we'll talk more. We've got fintech focused people on this call, but if you use the word fintech, financial technology, right? It's a very broad space. There are many, many different sectors. And it's very unlikely that any one fintech company is going to cover the entire breadth and depth of fintech well. It's just very, very unlikely. So in general, I see fintech as an infinite sum game. And I think that there is a multitude of opportunities for fintech companies to partner together in building out this ecosystem where we each specialize and really partnering to bring functionality together across the ecosystem.
Yeah. I think that is extremely relevant. And this also made it kind of, what it brought to my mind is, thinking about the competition in your space, right? Because it's easy to fall into this trap of it's us against them. But honestly, we're growing as a whole industry here, and it doesn't always have to be so kind of antagonistic when you have this infinite sum mindset, because I think this does tie into this kind of, it could also be like abundance versus scarcity, right? If you're thinking the market is scarce and you really have to divide it between the players, and there's no way to kind of create more opportunities, then yeah, that kind of gets you into that antagonistic mindset. Whereas when you're thinking infinite sum game, there's abundance that brings you into a more positive way of thinking, I think. Just to add on to what you already mentioned here. But I do love that, and you are excused for having 2 tips because both of them are really good.
So the infinite sum player, right, when they come to the game and there's competition, they think, how can I take this game that seems to be framed right now as a zero sum game? And how might I frame this to be an infinite sum game?
Oh
So
wow.
instead of how do I compete with you, are there ways we can partner together?
Hmm. Wow, that is very interesting. I do wonder, do you have like direct experience with that, or have you seen examples of it? In any way to make it a little bit more concrete?
Um, yes, definitely. But I'd probably speak in some abstractions or around some of the situations. But um, what do I want to say? I think that if you approach a situation where there's competition, one of
Uh-huh.
the things that the infinite sum mindset might bring to you is that there there's always some deficiency on both sides of the
Yeah.
competition. There's always something that one player or company or whatever is very good at, and there's on the other side something that the other company or the other player is very good at. But each player also has deficiencies,
Hmm.
and highlighting those deficiencies, understanding them, letting a curtain down, and making having the opportunity to be vulnerable about those carefully may highlight where one player can benefit from working more closely with another player in the game.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that, and yeah, it does come to mind. Again, thank you for sharing about that. It's a great tip and a great. It might be also a great introduction for the rest of our conversation. But before we go into kind of the main topic, developer experience, how to evangelize your API, first of all, wanted to highlight a comment. We are in fact live. Justina is saying all good, guys. Thank you, Justina. Very nice to have the confirmation that everything is working correctly. And remember, any questions, any comments you might have, throw them our way. We've got Skyler here to benefit from his knowledge. I've got questions, but yours, dear watchers and listeners, are more important. So do not hesitate. In the meantime, before we go into the developer experience, could you give a little more context about kind of what perspective you're speaking from? Your SVP of Technology at Dwolla right now. What does that mean? What are you involved in? Give us a little bit of the origin story thus far, the highlights, so we know where you're kind of coming from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep it brief.
Hmm.
So I'm a U.S. Midwestern born and raised boy here. I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, is where I'm headquartered or where I live. I graduated from Drake University here in Des Moines, Iowa, and I graduated with a degree in computer science. I sort of cut my teeth and got started as a software engineer in the insurance industry right out of school. And I spent a lot of time working for a really, really big insurance company, building systems for quoting commercial insurance. Somewhere around the 5th or 6th year into my career, I started to get antsy,
Huh.
thinking about what I could be or what I could do. And I started looking around and was really fascinated by startups, the idea of
Huh.
creating or building something. And I started looking around my area for what startups were available. I started hearing a lot about this company called Dwolla that Ben Milne had founded and was building in Des Moines, Iowa, and it was getting national recognition. And so I started thinking about and looking into this and considering what it might be like to join as a software engineer and join that company.
Hmm.
I met both Ben a couple times and decided to take the leap and go into startups. So in 2012, I started at Dwolla as a software engineer, and I worked on our platform and our systems for about 5 years
Huh.
as a software engineer directly. A little bit into my career here, I started to take on some additional responsibilities. So I took on some team lead responsibilities, some bigger project initiatives. And while I wasn't always interested in that kind of thing in an enterprise, I started to become more interested in leading projects and leading teams here at Dwolla.
Yeah.
And I sort of, being one of the earlier employees, not the earliest, but being an early employee in the company, I really felt this tie and this sense to the mission that Dwolla had developed. And I wanted to be part of continuing to hone and craft and build that mission, build that culture, and make sure that it was something that sustained throughout the life of the company. And that started to be something that I started to feel really passionate about. So in 2016, Ben asked me to take on a role at Dwolla as director of engineering. At that time, I was leading our platform engineering team. And so here at Dwolla, we kind of consider our platform engineering team to kind of be, we call it platform intentionally, right? It's the foundation on which all the technology that we offer to our customers is sort of built upon. And bringing in the larger story we're going to talk about today, this is kind of some of my first experience in developer experience itself. Not external developer experience, but internal developer experience, right? The technical foundation that we were building at Dwolla, the platform that all of our other tech, all of the products that we offered to customers would be built upon. And we wanted to design systems and processes and procedures that were really simple and easy to use for our internal developers so they could move quickly when they were developing new services, new products, new functionality. So that's when I started to develop this developer experience mindset that I think we've, across the business, we've developed as part of our engineering culture.
And
so
initially,
this is 2016. Yep, keep going.
Sorry, initially it was internally is what I'm hearing. So we were focusing more on the in-house developers and their experience.
I don't know that it was only initially internally. I think it was sort of culturally part of what we developed as an engineering team.
Okay.
We were thinking about using our own APIs, our external APIs that we offered. We thought about those. We talked about them. So we sat in rooms and argued about those APIs, how they should be designed, how they should be used, what fields should go where. We argued. We were passionate about it. But we also, thought about the same thing for that internal platform we're building to even create and deliver our APIs. We wanted that to be easy and use. We really had a craftsperson approach to this. We thought about this as a craft that we were developing and really argued about the details, the designs, all these things that were part of our tech suite we were developing at the time.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that approach. And even right now, at least, for example, on the STX Next website, software craftsmanship is one of our values too. And then for good reason. It's great to see people who are so passionate about software and wanting to build it the right way with all the details included. Okay, so if you could continue the story and get us to why we're talking about this evangelism aspect of the developer experience. Let's continue.
Yeah, sounds good. So I did this director of platform engineering role at Dwolla for several years. And I think it was maybe around 2018 at the time. I was doing lots of one-on-one walks with our CEO and founder, Ben Milne. And he started sort of seeding this idea to me of becoming the VP of engineering at Dwolla. And at first I was really nervous about that. I wasn't sure that I was ready to take on that kind of responsibility. It's a big responsibility. I felt that I had done well as a director of platform engineering, but I was nervous about taking on the larger role, bringing in product engineering and several other things. And Ben really encouraged me to keep thinking through this. We talked about some of my concerns. We talked about what it might look like. We explored the topic pretty thoroughly. And over time, he convinced me that this would be a good thing for me to take on. So it was late 2018 that I took on my first VP role as VP of engineering here at Dwolla. And I did that for several years. Until recently, I've taken on a few more areas of responsibility and became the SVP of Technology here at Dwolla. So at that time, I took on additional responsibilities in InfoSec, Salesforce, corporate IT, and a few different other areas.
Okay. Yeah. I was actually very curious about the difference between VP of Engineering, SVP of Technology. Like how, perhaps one question on my mind is kind of why is it structured that way? And another would be kind of how is it communicated in terms of your broader area of responsibility. I just wonder about how you're kind of managing to encompass even more with your role, and how that works for you.
At this point, the way that we've thought about it is that all things that would fall under a technology umbrella at Dwolla would be kind of within my area of responsibility.
I see.
Now, don't know all of these areas deeply.
Uh-huh.
That's one of the things that I've learned over time when I've moved from being a core engineer to taking on director roles to VP roles, is that at each layer, I've become more and more a generalist than I was a specialist before.
Okay, yeah.
And so I'm really a technology generalist, where I have specialists that are experts in many different domains across the business, and I rely on those specialists to run their respective areas. And my role has really turned into more technology leadership than it has
Mhm.
been deep in the weeds.
Okay, yeah, and that sounds like material for like a whole another session on how
Yeah,
that went and the challenges related to that. But we
of
did promise our
course.
watchers and listeners a specific topic, so let's try and start touching upon it then. So,
Sure.
usually to kind of to pull back the curtain here, when I prepare for these sessions, there's a prep call, right? So we got on a call a few weeks ago, and I asked you, what is the thing that tech leaders should work the most on? What should they stop doing, start doing? What are they not focusing on? That is really, really important. And the thing that you highlighted that we chose as the topic for this session was evangelism and really focusing on this developer experience. So could you say more about why you think this is an important area, why it's worth focusing on, and what will be the return on that investment of effort in this area?
Yeah, so Dwolla is, as we've kind of discussed here a little bit, a API and technology driven company.
Mhm.
And so a tremendous part of what we do is offering APIs to interface with our systems. And maybe we should take a second in a minute or two to come back to kind of what Dwolla does, which might help
Yeah, you
paint
know
a
what?
broader
Maybe let's
picture.
start with that and make it a lot more
Yeah,
concrete. Yeah, I think
yeah,
that
let's
would be
work our
very
way
prudent.
backwards. That makes sense. So Dwolla is a US based fintech company, headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa, and we're focused on offering sophisticated account to account payment solutions for innovators. So, for the listeners that aren't as familiar with some of the fintech lingo and terminology, maybe take a step back and what the heck are account to account payments, often referred to as A to A payments. Um, Account to account transfers on the surface are really a pretty simple concept. Like, it's the concept of moving funds from an account at one financial institution to an account at another financial institution.
Mhm.
And in the US, there's actually several different methodologies or payment methods for accomplishing this task. There's the ACH network. There's also emerging faster payment networks like the real-time network offered by the clearinghouse, or push to card networks that offer faster payment solutions. So Dwolla is really in the middle of offering account to account payment solutions. We interface directly with many of these payment networks that allow account to account payments to happen. And we build a single API layer that sits on top of those payment methods.
Mhm.
We offer that single API layer to our clients and customers, and they will go through a process of integrating or embedding those payment solutions into their applications and their solutions. So
Mhm.
what we're essentially doing is giving companies the ability to embed account to account payment solutions in their platforms in order to collect, disperse, or sometimes facilitate payments between their customers and themselves.
Yeah, and if you were to kind of explain this in simple English from the perspective of the user, what is the difference that you make for them in terms of how their interaction with somebody's app might look like?
Yeah. So for the end user, the idea is that this is kind of a seamless experience.
Mhm.
So um, many consumers in the US today are used to using card-based payments as part of uh, their payment flow. Um, but going forward, and there's other ways to accomplish payment flows. Going forward, we really see account to account payments sort of taking hold because merchants are really struggling a lot of times with card payments and the card networks and the complexity and the costs of using these networks. Account-to-account payments are much simpler, in some cases much faster, and can be offered on fractions of the dollar in terms of reduced cost to merchants that offer them. From a consumer experience, we're hopeful that these payment rails will continue to emerge and develop, and will sort of be seamless to consumers over time. And we'll really think about where funds come from, versus credit card versus account-to-account payment methodologies.
Okay.
A lot of times we talk about consumers. I guess another area that I would highlight is that these payment rails, the account-to-account payment rails, are often more attractive for business-to-business transactions than they might be for consumer-to-business transactions.
I see. Okay. All right. So when I'm imagining this from the perspective of the end user, it's like I'm using an app, I'm paying. Oh, it's not a card payment, it's an account-to-account payment. But it's like, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, this is one of these types of situations where it's like, if you're doing your job well, you're not even noticed by the end user. It's just they stay in the same app, it's seamless, and they just move on, and their payment went through quickly and easily.
Yeah, that's correct. From Dwolla's perspective, we want to be white labeled as part of this flow, right? So as much as possible, what we mean by white labeled is that we want our customers to completely control the experience that they have with their users. We don't want as much as possible to provide any friction where a customer might be wondering, well, what is this Dwolla thing that I'm interacting with? As much as possible, we want to be embedded as part of application's experience.
Yeah, right. I can imagine that, because when you're at this payment stage, it's a very sensitive stage, and when you're starting to suddenly see a different logo, different URL, it might put doubt in your mind, and that is a way to potentially lose business. So white labeling
Certainly
makes a ton of sense here, obviously.
Certainly.
Okay, so that's kind of the front end of things, but obviously the interesting action is kind of under the hood and how this all works when it comes to actually integrating Dwolla with certain businesses, kind of how they're handling payments. So does that bring us then to kind of integrating the API and building a great developer experience?
Yeah, I think that's better to launch into it from here.
Yeah, awesome.
So yeah, knowing that we've got the idea here, the whole concept of this platform is that it is to be embedded in other applications. And how does that happen? Well, that happens through technical integrations at its root. And so that means that a big consumer of Dwolla's technology and all of the products and features and documentation that we develop is for developers. So we really, really value the developer experience. Like I talked about a few minutes ago, we've painstakingly spent hours in rooms thinking through designs of APIs and systems, supporting tools, technology, documentation, so that when a developer wants to embed account-to-account payments in their application, it's as simple as we can possibly make it.
Yeah.
That there's as little friction as we can possibly add into that picture. We want to help them get up and going as fast as possible. In fact, that's actually one of the metrics that we track as a business. We track the time to value for our customers. And, many times we want to be able to move as fast, and we want to be completely out of the way so that a business can move as fast as they can to move forward with account-to-account payments. So we're tracking very closely this time to value, where we're seeing in some cases when businesses are ready and itching to move forward with these types of payment solutions, that they can go live in several days on our platform.
Oh, wow. Okay, so how do you, because I'm thinking from the perspective of somebody who hasn't done it, hasn't focused on this, the first question that pops in my mind is, how do you define this time to value then? It's from the moment that X happens to the moment that Y happens. What is X and Y here?
It's the moment they click sign up to the moment that they have the ability to transact in our production environment.
Okay. And what are some of the optimizations that you introduced along the way to optimize this time then? Were there any particular breakthroughs? Were there any particular tactics that reduced this time significantly?
It's all about automation.
Okay.
We want to automate as much as possible in that entire flow. So
Mhm.
all of our sign-up processes are automated. Our underwriting referral processes are automated. So we move our clients through quickly,
Uh-huh.
make sure that we understand their business, how they'll be utilizing account-to-account payments, what types of funds flow. We come to back to that in a minute. Funds flows. What kinds
Yeah.
of funds flows they'll be utilizing, what kinds of payment methods they'll be utilizing, and how their applications will interface with this account-to-account payment rail that they're part of now.
Okay.
So we designed our experience to work around that almost entirely, right? So that's a really high level. Maybe we could break it down and go one layer deeper and talk about, obviously there's a developer integration that's going to happen here. So what are
Mhm.
some of the tools and techniques that we provide to make that faster? The first one, I already talked about this. People probably get sick of hearing me say it. Really clean, simple to use APIs that are easy to understand and easy to get started with.
Uh-huh.
So we think it's really almost as simple as 3 API endpoints to get started, right? The first API endpoint is to onboard a customer. The
Mhm.
second API endpoint is to attach a funding source to that customer. And the third API endpoint is to transact with that customer. So
Okay.
while there's, of course, other things you need to think through, 3 API endpoints to get your integration started and off the ground.
Mhm.
So that's the first kind of tip of that spear. The next layer down, then I think another layer down from there is really clean and clear API documentation.
Mhm.
So that when a customer has an issue or is trying to understand how the API works, how they might interact with it, um, understanding what certain endpoints mean, terminology, we've built out deep, sophisticated API dev docs at developers.dwolla.com that clearly define end to end how the API works and how to solve problems.
Okay.
Another layer down from that is supporting tooling. So not just the documentation in the API, but SDKs that allow you to integrate with the API more quickly. Webhook infrastructure that allows you to receive asynchronous notifications of things that are happening in your application, reacting to them. And then drop-in components, which are UI elements that interface with our API that significantly reduce the amount of code that you have to develop to get started on our systems.
Uh-huh. Okay, I see. So you just hit me with just so many various things to focus on, and so many things that seem important to build this great developer experience in multiple layers. So the questions on my mind are, okay, so where do things go awry usually the most? Where do I start? What do I focus on that will get me the biggest return on investment as I'm trying to improve this experience?
What we've found is that the process of embedding payments, account to account payments into your application, we've simplified that drastically and it's really straightforward.
Uh-huh.
The challenge sometimes occurs in where you might be trying to fit account to account payments into a solution that doesn't really fit or
Mhm.
that needs to be adjusted in some way slightly to work for your use case.
Mhm.
So at Dwolla, we actually have not just engineers that know our payment platforms and systems very well, but the whole business has really focused around this.
Mhm.
And we have a team, an army essentially of account integration managers and experts. So every one of our clients that's going live is assigned an integration expert who's
Okay.
helping them think through and design, taking a very consultative approach on how to design the payment methods they utilize and the funds flows that they utilize as part of their application, helping them design that. Sometimes we even go as far as diagramming that with them and working through it with them, and then helping them walk through the entire integration experience. So they're
Okay.
not just technical things that we bring, but also business related things as well.
Okay, so I'm trying to picture the process then here. I click sign up on your
Mhm.
website, and do I get like an email, some kind of outreach from this account? I'm sorry, I forgot the name. Account. Could you
It,
repeat
it,
that?
I think integration consultants is what we call them now.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it varies based on the tier in which you're using, the pricing tier in which you're using in our application. So
Mhm.
we have a get started, simple payment flows, click sign up, and self guide through it, right?
Uh-huh.
But one of the things that is sort of Dwolla's secret sauce is that we've become over time we've become absolute experts in this kind of payment technology.
Mhm.
And if you need that kind of payments expertise, we have additional tiers of business that you can sign up for in our process to pull in some of these integration experts to help you really get going.
Okay.
So there's a couple different paths that you can head down that way.
Okay. So what I'm thinking about from the perspective of somebody who's trying to do this work that you've already done, right? To build
Mhm.
this great experience, and I know I keep coming back to it. Is one thing I'm thinking about is okay, it's good to have these tiers, right? To filter out the cases where a simple self guide process would be sufficient, but for the more complicated cases, you need actual people to actually reach out and support kind of one on one the people trying to integrate. I was wondering if you have any kind of insight on how should these people, like what makes a good integration consultant, for example? What should they focus on? What kind of questions they ask? I know it's just one piece of this whole, but I'm very fascinated by it. So if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a really big part of being a great integration consultant is understanding the systems that you support, how they
Uh-huh.
work, being
Yeah.
able to provide great advice on the right way to piece things together. Our
Mhm.
integration consultants have seen many different types of payment applications. They've seen our technology used in many different scenarios. And so they're able to lift out some abstractions and some patterns where certain techniques can be re-implemented or reused
Mhm.
across different kinds of applications. So that's something that we can definitely bring to the table, right? As we have experience implementing this.
Right.
Let's take a step back. If you were going to go and do this on your own, right? If you were going to go try to add this type of payment capability to your application without working through Dwolla at all, what would you have to do? You'd have to go and form a relationship with a US financial institution, with a bank. That's a big process,
Yeah.
a long process, right? You're going to be contracting with them, discussing with them, um, trying to figure out how to piece everything together, business relationship. Then you have to figure out how to integrate with their systems. And often every bank, every financial institution, they have some difference in how their systems work. And Dwolla is going to bring a consistent interface to that. So that's something else
Okay.
to provide, right? And then going a step further, then you once you've interfaced, you also have to understand, as we started to talk about, all things that will go right, but also the non-happy path scenarios, things that could go wrong that you have to plan for.
Yeah.
All that stuff would be things you've got to plan for in order to build an integration to a financial institution in the US. I would guess it would take you 12 to 24 months if you're really, really good at it to move through that kind of integration.
Yeah.
So let's pull that back at Dwolla, right? We're going to potentially through our APIs and the developer tools we've created, get you up and going in maybe as fast as a few business days
Uh-huh.
versus a year to 18 months to go live with the bank yourself.
Okay.
There's a huge time to value proposition there.
Yeah, yeah, I can absolutely see that. And I suppose that also touches upon the evangelism side of things, right? Actually selling the idea that, you should consider integration versus going it on your own because of what you just mentioned. The time frame is vastly different there. But before we
Mm-hmm.
go more into evangelism, because I do want to get your thoughts on that too, one thing that stuck out to me was documentation, actually. I find it fascinating how, for example, I'm a writer by trade. Initially I spent most of my days at STX Next just writing content. And,
Mm-hmm.
structure is so important when it comes to, writing a good blog post or writing an ebook. Now, when I'm thinking about this documentation, which what you're saying is, from what you're saying, is really comprehensive, it has a lot of information. Did you have any of those arguments about how the documentation is structured, how to make it easy to navigate? Are there any particular secret tips? Because I know, a lot of managers and a lot of development teams are thinking how to write good documentation. So here, was there anything in particular that you identified as like winning tactics for structuring this document so that despite of the wealth of information in there, it's easy to use, easy to navigate, and it creates this seamless and smooth experience?
Yeah. One secret here is that we have an amazing team of developer advocates that we've
Hmm.
formed at Dwolla. And those developer advocates are responsible for maintaining our dev docs.
Okay.
Um, and so they're looking, always approaching those dev docs through the lens of how will a developer read, how will a developer integrate with this, and how will they internalize what we're saying. So we have engineers, developers who know how developers work, who can empathize with them, who are creating the actual documentation that other engineers use.
Okay.
That's I don't know if it's a secret, but that's the way that we work toward that problem.
I see. And when somebody's and forgive my ignorance here, when somebody's a developer advocate, does that mean they do some? This is something they do in addition to being a developer, or is it like a side path in their career growth? How is that usually structured?
Yeah, so I mentioned as SVP of Tech, I have lots of different hats or different teams that are working through me. This is a
Yeah.
completely separate discipline.
Okay.
Developer advocacy is a separate discipline that's part of what we do at Dwolla. They're not,
Mhm.
while they're just as talented and have just as much experience in technology as folks on our core software engineering team, it's not our software engineers. These folks are really minded toward giving developers the absolute best experience in coming onto our platform through documentation, but also where necessary, they're part of those integration management discussions as well. So they're available as a resource to our clients that are going live to help them understand issues or problems they've come across. And then we take the things we learn after discussing with them, challenges, problems, things that our developers are encountering, and we build that back into the documentation so it's simpler and more seamless next time.
Okay.
Sometimes
Wow.
it's not just documentation, sometimes it could result in changes back to the core product as well.
Okay. Right. Well, I feel that that's crucial, and that's a piece of advice we've heard on Tech Leaders Hub more than once. Close those feedback loops, and just make sure that the people who are actually on the front lines with the people you're serving as a business report back in terms of how we can make things better for all of the future customers, all of the future businesses we might be serving. So I love that, honestly, and I'm really still kind of fascinated by this developer advocate role. So I thought I might just ask just one more question here. Is like, what's the usual motivation behind kind of transitioning? Because from what I'm hearing, they are often previously developers, but they're kind of transition into developer advocate. Is there a particular type of person that's good at it? You know, if I'm thinking about building out this team, how do I start? You know, how do I kind of sell the idea of becoming developer advocate? I'm really curious about that, and it is my show, so I'm going to ask about it. If you could tell me a little bit about that.
Um, I don't know that I've thought about this question deeply, but maybe just a
Sure.
few observations. One of the things that I've noticed as part of our really awesome developer relations team here and developer advocates at Dwolla is that these folks often have a passion for writing, technical writing. They're often very good technical writers. So
Okay.
that's something that sticks out to me. Another thing that sticks out to me is they're often very empathetic to the experience of how developers work with technology, very
Hmm.
empathetic to the pain points that they're encountering, how to make things easier. They really love optimization.
Right. Right.
I love the idea of, hey, this person has interacted with this in this way. They had this feedback that gave me this idea. What would it be like to go and implement this idea? And they're really just kind of passionate about that optimization.
Wow, that's amazing.
Those,
That is gold. You know, you said it's just loose thoughts, but I actually love that, and it's something that people listening to this can look out for now when they're thinking of having developer advocates in their own structure. So I love
yeah,
that. Okay, so something else that I heard kind of along the way was you mentioning this process of creating this experience. You mentioned some of these kind of heated arguments of how to structure things, you know, how to make things really, really simple, seamless for the developers integrating your API. And I'm really curious: are there any particular elements that you had, you know, particularly heated debates about? Something that was really you were really passionate about improving, something that you think made a big difference, or was a difficult decision? I'm kind of fishing for like a story here, if there's any of, you know, what you might remember from these decisions that you made on the path to building a great developer experience.
Well, I think we've learned a lot of things along the way.
Yeah.
I'll go way back to some of Dwolla's first APIs that we developed. This would be way back, let's call it 2012, maybe even earlier. Initial versions of our API were APIs, but I would say they were rudimentary APIs. They weren't rich APIs. And when I say rich APIs, what I mean is that it's almost from a developer experience interacting with an API, interacting with it like you would interact with a web page. So I know that seems kind of abstract, but there's sort of like the idea of an API is like I call a system and I get a response back. And so I ask it to do something and it tells me whether or not it did it. That's what I would consider kind of a rudimentary approach to APIs and like a getting started and just the bare basics. But a more rich API was something that we wanted to develop. And in a more rich API experience, I make a call to an API and ask it to do something, and it returns me information, but not just the result of what happened. It returns me information about where I might go next. So let's take, for example, a rich API. Let's say that I'm going through the process of creating a customer. So I call the API endpoint to create a customer and I get back a result. The result tells me one thing, whether or not creating this was successful. If it's successful, it might give me more information, like where I can go and get the balance for that customer, or where I can go and edit details for that customer or pour more information about the customer as a result of what comes back from the API. I can kind of work with that response object and decide where to go next. Or let's say I go to create a customer, I call a system and I get back a failure. I don't just get back that it failed, I get back a deep reason why it failed with an explanation. And I might also get links in my API response that my code can traverse and follow the links to say, and here's what you do now to resolve this issue. This customer wasn't created successfully or wasn't verified successfully for this reason. Follow these links to go take the next steps. So one of the heated arguments we had was how to build a more rich API, what kinds of things we wanted to create in a rich API. And then obviously we can't return everything. We want it to be fast. So we can't send the world back in every API response. So how do we make it fast? How do we organize the information in a way that will make sense? That's not just something we've invented on our own, but something that would be also a standard you would see in other places.
Okay. So I was wondering, first of all, that is great. I love that answer. It brings to my mind these, and this might be an analogy that totally flops, but let's see. It brings to my mind these text-based computer adventure games where it's like you're standing in a room, you can open a door or you can light a torch. What do you do? When you do one of those, it actually gives you this additional information. You can now see this. There's 3 doors. Which one do you go through? It sounds like, I mean, that's at least how I envision it. It gives you this additional context, so you're not just stuck with, okay, what was it that I could interact with here, and what were the steps that I could take here? I don't know. Does that analogy work, or is there somewhere that it breaks?
Yeah, I think that analogy works. Definitely.
Okay. All right, so that's
might
how
steal it.
You know what? By all means, I would be so grateful, glad if you did that. Seriously, awesome. Just yeah, I would be very proud. So the next question on my mind was: so you had to decide, like you said, you can't send back the world. So then how do you decide what information is the most important? Did you have some certain criteria, a certain question that you asked yourself, a mental model for it, perhaps? Was there anything that kind of guided your way here?
I think that what we try to focus on is things that made sense as logical next steps. So let's use a concrete example. Let's say that we're building an API or part of our API for retrieving transfers or transactions that have occurred, right? So what would be a reason that you would need something like that? Well, one reason might be that within your application, you've embedded account-to-account payments, and you want to show a customer a transaction listing of the transactions that have occurred. you're not going to demonstrate to them, you're not going to show them all the transactions that have occurred over time in a single page. That's too much. Let's say they have tens of thousands of transactions. You don't give them one web page with all 10,000 of them, right? You page it,
Yeah.
you break it into small chunks. So if you're going to use an API to do that, you're going to expect to get the results back in small chunks. But you might also assume that someone's using this API to build pagination, right? So within the API response, you give them the results, but you might also give them a link to the next set of results or a link to the previous set of results, because you know logically it makes sense that this is the type of thing they're using this API to build. And so you're designing the API for the use case to be more holistic for exactly what it was intended to be used for.
Okay.
Now, we're also deep systems engineers here at Dwolla. And so we know that you don't always want this sort of communication with systems where you call an API, get a result back, do something with it, call an API, get a result back. Sometimes your systems communicate in not synchronous ways like I just described, but asynchronous ways, right? You want to receive, let's say, a stream of events that are constantly happening as part of your application. And you might want to process that stream of events that are occurring as a separate entity or a separate system from your core system. Dwolla has designed technology for that too. I mentioned a webhook infrastructure that essentially allows a customer to receive an event stream of all of the things that are occurring as part of their application. Every time a customer is created, a transaction occurs, a funding source is attached, they receive this series of events. They can then build a class of systems called reactive applications that react to the results of what's occurring in the system, right? So they can receive these events and take actions based on events that have occurred in an asynchronous manner that allows them to do more things in parallel in their applications than having to do everything in one swoop.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds also very useful. Testing the limits of my technical knowledge here, I will admit, but I'm sure a lot of the watchers and listeners are getting a lot from that. We have a comment coming in related to something we mentioned at the beginning, but I do love to highlight comments. So short break for that as we go into a little bit of the evangelism is what I would like to do next. And then, gosh, we're almost out of time. So comment first. Cesar is saying, it's also important to train the team. It's definitely an infinite sum game, not only for one company, but also for the IT industry as a whole. I mean, asking if you would agree is a little bit redundant here, but would you add anything on top of that?
No, I think this is exactly the kind of mindset I talked about. Sounds like a person that's got the infinite sum game mindset.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Cesare. That was actually our head of Node.js commenting there. So thank you for joining in. Thank you for tuning in. And any additional questions, comments, send them our way. So it feels like within this session we got quite deep into the developer experience. We got into the various kind of types of players involved in this. I discovered API integration consultants and developer advocates today.
Yeah.
But I did want to talk also about the evangelism side of things, briefly, I suppose, because the time limit is almost upon us. In terms of, okay, so now, how would you kind of define evangelism? And also, what would be your kind of tips for somebody who knows they should be doing it or doing more of it, but they don't know where to start?
At the highest level, I think evangelism is as a tech leader, your outward facing initiatives to bring folks to your technology. This call right now is a perfect example of doing so, right?
Yeah, there you go.
You're outward facing, talking about your teams, talking about your technology, showing your passion behind these things, how much you care about them, and trying to make sure that people are aware of that. There's other ways to do it. This isn't the only way. Blog posts are another way. Case studies are another way. Promoting content for your company on LinkedIn and Twitter and other places. Those are all examples of a way you as a tech leader could be evangelizing the technology that your teams are building.
I love that. You're speaking my language now, blog posts, Twitter, case studies. Hey,
Yep.
that's, in some other circles, that's called marketing, actually. you know. All right. So
Yeah.
that makes me even more curious about what you would say is what kind of evangelism initiatives do you find the most kind of return on investment on? And, again, where do I start? If I'm pressed for time, what is the one thing that I can do that will give me the most for the effort invested, for example?
Um, my advice here would be, as a tech leader, focus. You'll want to sprinkle across many different types of patterns and platforms. You're in marketing, so you can give me better advice there, but I think you want to sprinkle across multiple. But if I were
Mhm.
going to pick where you invest most of your time, I would pick investing the most of your time in what you're absolute best at. And each of us is better at one thing or the other, right? So there's
Mhm.
sort of this school of thought of like, well, if you have skills, do you focus on the skills that are your strengths and developing those and get better and better at those? Or do
Right,
you focus
right.
on your weaknesses and develop those? And I won't try to unpack that today. But my advice would be in this particular category, pick what you're best at and focus there.
Yeah.
For me, where I'm best is working with, I love working with customers and clients. I love more
Mhm.
of the smaller one-on-one interactions and understanding what they're trying to solve and helping work through that. So I spend um, a good portion of my time meeting with potential clients and helping to problem solve with them. I love problem solving. So
Okay.
unpacking the problems and experiences, the issues that they're having, and helping them through evangelism, right? Helping them think about how they might apply your company's set of solutions to that.
Mhm. And okay, so that's great. That's very specific, and I love that. So let me drill down just one layer deeper here. Then one-on-one conversations with customers, trying to problem solve with them. What will your advice be for that? How do you do it well? Was there anything that you learned in this area that you're using now, or any kind of you know patterns that work? Anything that you could share with our watchers and listeners here?
I think my advice is going to be a little obvious, but it would be listen, listen, listen.
Yeah.
Don't talk, listen. Ask leading questions. Leading
Uh-huh.
questions are what, why, how? How does this work? What is exactly is this problem? When do you usually encounter this?
Mhm.
Um, Ask questions, learn, and problem solve. Right? You many times when you meet with someone, or right, someone is describing a problem to you, they'll often describe symptoms that they have. And when you
Mhm.
want to solve a problem, you don't want to solve symptoms. You want to solve
Mhm.
the root problem.
Yeah.
And we're often so enamored in the problems that we have that we
Mhm.
get stuck on these symptoms that we see over and over again. And sometimes we don't know the root of the symptoms. So your job when you're doing this is to try to really listen and ask leading questions that get you to the root cause, because you can only truly problem solve when you get to the.
Yeah, that's one thing one kind of model that I love to use personally is the five whys. And if you
Yeah.
want to pick something up that's immediately ready to use, ask the five whys, and it works for talking with potential customers. It works with talking with yourself. I find I'm struggling with this problem. I can't find motivation to do a certain thing. Why? Because I didn't have enough coffee. Why? Because I didn't have, and then you just go on digging into the problems and you find the actual root cause of what you're struggling with. So I love that. I love the listen, listen, listen advice. It actually brings to my mind the session that we had with Matthew Harris back in 2020 about negotiation for technical managers. Check that out if you're into Tech Leaders Hub. And you should be if you're listening to the very end of our conversation
Yeah.
here, basically. So, Skylar, okay, if I could trouble you for one more, I wanted to just make sure. mm, Obviously, we haven't exhausted the subject, right? But
Yeah.
maybe there's something that you kind of had in your mind that you thought, going into this, I really need to share about this. I really need to share this piece of advice that I kind of haven't touched upon with my questions that you would still like to share. I would like to give you kind of the room, to put that out.
Yeah. Um, there's something that I had in my mind that I didn't get to discuss yet.
Yeah.
And it's probably more of like leaving the audience with a thought-provoking question.
Hmm.
You'll probably find the video really quickly, but there's a video from a gentleman named Don Norman. where he talks about user experience. It's a very short clip. It's about a minute and a half, maybe. And Don Norman worked at Apple for a long time in the early days, as far as I understand. I don't know his career deeply, but worked at Apple in the early days when they were developing PCs and distributing them into the market. And he was focused on user experience. And so in this video, they ask him, well, what does user experience mean to you? And when I first watched it, I was expecting him to go in, well, this is how you use the PC. This is what we were thinking about in the use of PCs. This is how we were thinking about simplifying the interfaces for them and making them easier for customers to understand more quickly and adopt. That's where I was expecting him to go. But he goes somewhere completely different in the video that I watched. And he talks about the experience of getting your first PC. And you go to the store and you buy this PC and it's in a box. And then you take it to your car and maybe it doesn't fit in the car. I'm paraphrasing things that he says. Maybe it doesn't fit easily in the car. That's part of the experience. Then you get it back home and you open up the box and you look inside and it's complex. Do you take time to put it together? Are the instructions easier to understand? That's part of the experience. And that watching that and what I thought he would say and what he actually said, that was a mind opener for me. And I started relating that to this topic we're talking about today of developer experience. Developer experience isn't just I've written code and it talks to the API, I get responses back, things happen and I react to them. It's got to be something more broad. It's got to be something more broad. When I go to work with the company that I'm working with, and I'm a developer interfacing with another company, what's my experience when I need help? What's my experience when errors occur? That's a broader, more holistic thing about developer experience that I'd like to leave the listeners with today, right? That was an eye-opening thing for me to consider.
Yeah. So it's much broader. It's what happens after I click sign up. What kind of emails do I get? What does the call with the consultant look like? It's a much broader perspective, and I absolutely agree. It's my eyes are more open now as well. Thank you. I'm really glad I asked that additional question, and very much leaving the best for last here, probably for a lot of people. Thank you, Skyler.
Of course.
So before we go offline, sadly, the hour is up. I don't mean to kind of keep you longer than we agreed upon, sadly. I wanted to ask you, do you have anything to share with our audience in terms of announcements? You've made, I think, a great case for working with Dwolla. So are you hiring by any chance? What would you like to share? Where should we kind of follow you? Where should we go?
I totally miss as a tech leader. That should have been the first thing I said. We are seeking engineers to join our team. If you're interested in being a software engineer at Dwolla, please reach out. We have lots of exciting open positions. That's one for sure. If you're interested in learning more, exploring more about Dwolla's technology suites or account-to-account payments, we have a very sophisticated sandbox environment. You can sign up, test all the technology that we talked about today, test the payment flows, test onboarding. That's part of our developer experience. We'd love to see you there. And we're continuing to add new functionality to our applications. Just recently, I mentioned it briefly, but we've introduced drop-in components as a way to make it more simple to get started on Dwolla. We're continuing to evolve into faster payment networks like real-time payments, RTP. And then we just have started to release a feature called virtual account numbers, which is a really exciting feature to explore if you're into fintech. So those are all announcements and exciting things from the Dwolla end.
Yeah. And sorry, just out of curiosity, on the engineering end, are you looking for developers with particular technologies, skills in those?
Yeah, we're looking for, front end, full stack, back end engineers, platform engineers, really across the board. We're looking for great individuals to join our team, right? Referencing back to something I talked about at the very beginning, I'm only as good as the people that are on my team and the people that are on the bus at Dwolla. So I want the very best people to work with. That's what I'm looking for.
So that sounds interesting. Get on the bus is how I would summarize that. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Some people might be meeting SDX Next for the first time. So if I could just take 30 seconds. Hi, thank you for joining Tech Leaders Hub. It's brought to you by SDX Next. We're Europe's largest Python software development company. We specialize in Python. We've got JavaScript and Node.js too within our technologies. We've attracted some of the best talent in Poland for these technologies, as well as testers, designers, DevOps, machine learning. So if you're building a product, thinking of building a product, need additional resources, reach out to us, sdxnext.com. If you want more Tech Leaders Hub, that's techleadershub.com. The best way to follow us is just follow STX Next on LinkedIn. And that's where we have the most activity. That's where we're loudest. And that's where you can find our sessions. And that's where the comments today came in, for example. So that's the 30-second pitch. Skyler, thank you so much for sharing your deep expertise within this subject area. I really feel like we delivered a lot of value here today. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Kuba. I appreciate you inviting me. It was great to be here.
Awesome. And you watchers and listeners, we appreciate you too. And we hope we'll see you next time. For now, that's all. We're going offline. Enjoy the rest of your day. I need to find the button. Click the button. Bye, everyone.